Having previously examined the integrated and shadow aspects of masculine psychological models, our focus now shifts to exploring the feminine archetypes. Carl Jung purposefully avoided compiling a rigid catalogue of these primordial blueprints, believing they are as numerous as universal human experiences. Nevertheless, subsequent analytical psychologists expanded his foundational theories, crafting frameworks that help illuminate the complexities of both the male and female mind. Although these structural models remain incomplete, they serve as profoundly useful tools for gaining deeper insights into your own character, as well as the behavior of those around you. Whenever psychological conflicts remain ignored, they eventually solidify into complexes, which act as highly emotional constellations of thoughts that actively impede your personal growth. These psychological roadblocks reside firmly within the personal unconscious, steadily accumulating as a direct result of your unique life events. Yet, lying deeper beneath these acquired complexes are the foundational archetypes of the collective unconscious, representing ancient behavioral paradigms and primal imagery inherited at the moment of birth. While society freely acknowledges that individuals possess complexes, a less recognized truth is that these deep-seated fixations can actually possess you, acting as quasi-independent forces that disrupt and override your conscious willpower. Experiencing psychological pain from these internal conflicts does not necessarily indicate a mental disorder, as suffering functions as the natural and inevitable counterpart to joy. A psychic complex only devolves into a pathological state when it remains hidden from your awareness, silently dictating your actions from the shadows. As long as these buried elements stay concealed, they will secretly govern your path, leading you to mistakenly attribute your life's trajectory to inescapable destiny. Consequently, to harness the constructive power of any archetype, you must shift your focus away from wondering whether the dark side exists, and instead actively observe exactly how this hidden dimension emerges in your reality. Whenever an uncontrollable urge seizes your behavior and leaves you grappling with subsequent remorse, you are almost certainly colliding with your shadow. This obscured fragment of your identity anchors itself deep within the personal unconscious, functioning as a complex, though an overarching archetypal shadow, simultaneously exists to contain society's collectively repressed elements. Evading an undesirable aspect of your own psyche only guarantees that this dark reflection will relentlessly pursue you, reflecting back the exact same hostility you project toward it. Rather than allowing banished traits to turn venomous through rejection, you must courageously interrogate this darkness to uncover its demands, extracting the crucial wisdom necessary to mend your divided spirit. The true test of psychological integration lies in consciously identifying the moment your shadow attempts to seize control, thereby disarming its power over your actions. Ultimately, this concealed darkness can transform into a formidable ally, guiding you to discover the remedy hidden deep within your own trauma, much like a carefully calibrated drop of venom used to formulate a life-saving antidote. Applying this profound psychological lens to the female experience, the renowned psychoanalyst Jean Shinoda Bolen authored the 1984 work Goddesses in Every Woman, Powerful Archetypes in Women's Lives. Within its pages, she meticulously categorizes 7 distinct feminine psychological patterns, anchoring them to the immortal figures of ancient Greek mythology, whose epic narratives have resonated across humanity for over 3,000 years. Rather than dismissing mythological tales as simple fabrications or idle fantasies, you must recognize them as enduring structural templates that encapsulate the core dilemmas of human existence. Because a specific psychological pattern will be intensely activated in one individual while remaining dormant in another, the sources of ultimate fulfillment vary drastically among different people. Mastering the nuances of these feminine archetypes grants you profound clarity regarding internal emotional struggles, fundamentally transforming how you relate both to your own identity and to the surrounding social world. Furthermore, These ancient paradigms offer indispensable guidance across the gender spectrum, equipping anyone who studies them with a sophisticated framework for navigating romantic compatibility, understanding diverse personality structures, and anticipating interpersonal dynamics. By clearly identifying the subconscious currents steering your behavior, you take a monumental step toward embodying the ancient philosophical mandate to truly know yourself. Uncovering these ingrained operational modes acts as a powerful preventative measure, effectively shielding you from a tremendous amount of unnecessary psychological anguish. To map these complex internal terrains, Bolin turned to the legendary pantheon of Mount Olympus, as this divine collective flawlessly embodies the entire spectrum of human emotional and psychological traits. Out of the 12 primary Olympian deities, she selected 6 prominent female figures: Artemis, Athena, Hestia, Hera, Demeter, and Aphrodite, while also incorporating Persephone, the mythological daughter of Demeter, to complete her comprehensive psychological framework. Bolin categorizes these 7 dominant psychological profiles into 3 distinct groups: the fiercely independent virgin goddesses, represented by Artemis, Athena, and Hestia; the relationally vulnerable deities, consisting of Hera, Demeter, and Persephone; and the alchemical, transformative force embodied by Aphrodite. For a person to cultivate a richly creative existence, experience profound affection, and engage in deeply purposeful work, elements from all 3 of these divine categories must find active expression throughout their lifetime. While the latent blueprint of every single deity slumbers within the depths of the psyche, only a select few configurations will ever awaken to shape your conscious reality. However, you must remember that these primordial structures operate as entirely amoral, instinctual drives that exist completely separate from human ethical frameworks, displaying zero inherent concern for your personal well-being. Instead of blindly surrendering to these overwhelming psychic currents, you possess the capacity to impose human morality upon them, transforming a one-sided domination into a mutual exchange of profound psychological instruction. Allowing your ego to become completely absorbed by a mythological pattern invites disastrous consequences, frequently resulting in a catastrophic loss of humanity characterized by dangerous inflation and severe delusions of grandeur. You must constantly remind yourself that you are not a living archetype, but rather a fragile human consciousness navigating immense psychological tides that operate far beyond your direct command. Consequently, true psychological maturity requires the deliberate integration of these energies, a process where you respectfully acknowledge their autonomous nature while carefully harvesting their wisdom to navigate the relentless trials of your everyday existence. The first category, comprising the virgin goddesses Artemis, Athena, and Hestia, personifies the fiercely autonomous and self-sufficient dimensions of the feminine spirit. These psychological templates actively reject the constraints of emotional dependency, consistently choosing the pursuit of internal purpose over the heavy burdens of societal conformity. While Artemis and Athena channel this fierce autonomy into tangible external achievements and worldly victories, Hestia directs a potent energy inward to cultivate a profound spiritual sanctuary. In this psychological context, the concept of virginity has absolutely nothing to do with physical intimacy, but instead signifies an untouched, inviolable core of identity, a pure distillation of fundamental values that remains entirely uncorrupted by external influences. A profound, unwavering focus serves as the defining characteristic of the virgin goddesses. These mythical figures possess an extraordinary capacity to channel their awareness entirely toward their chosen pursuits, becoming utterly immersed in their endeavors. We can liken this concentrated awareness to a brilliant, penetrating spotlight that starkly illuminates its target while casting everything on the periphery into total shadow. When honed to its absolute peak, this mental acuity resembles a laser, capable of dissecting concepts with devastating precision or profound clarity, entirely contingent upon where that piercing attention is directed. The celestial figure of Artemis, celebrated by the Romans as Diana, reigns over the moon and the primal hunt. Myth tells us that as a young girl resting upon the knee of her father, Zeus, she secured his solemn vow to fulfill her deepest desires, demanding an unfailing bow, a loyal pack of hounds, a retinue of nymphs, absolute dominion over the untamed wilds, and everlasting maidenhood. Having received these divine gifts, she forever wanders the rugged landscapes alongside her companions, the lesser spirits of rivers, peaks, and forests, guiding them with the fierce devotion of an elder sibling. Brandishing her iconic silver weaponry with flawless precision, she stands as the ultimate marksman of nature, intrinsically linked to the fierce, untamed beasts that embody her formidable spirit. Entering the world as the elder twin to Apollo, the radiant god of the sun, she was born to Leto, a primal nature deity descended from the ancient Titans and sired by Olympus's supreme ruler, Zeus. Immediately upon taking her first breath, the infant goddess remarkably assisted her mother in enduring the agonizing delivery of her brother, a miraculous feat that forever established her as a patron deity of childbirth. Consequently, expecting mothers revered her as an untouched savior amidst their suffering, offering prayers to a protector who remained immune to mortal agony. Furthermore, she consistently intervened to defend her mother throughout various mythological tales, demonstrating a unique, fierce maternal loyalty unparalleled by any other female deity in the pantheon. Embracing her lunar domain, the moon goddess thrived under the veil of darkness, traversing her feral territories guided only by the silvery celestial glow or the flicker of flaming torches. A stark dichotomy existed between her and her brother Apollo, where he embodied the structured metropolis, the blazing sun, and docile livestock. She personified the untamed frontiers, the enigmatic night sky, and completely feral creatures. Ancient lore portrays her as a swift guardian of the innocent and an utterly ruthless executioner of transgressors, vividly illustrated when she mercilessly transmuted the voyeuristic hunter Actaeon into a stag, condemning him to be ravaged by his own hunting dogs. This brutal retaliation underscores her uncompromising nature as she perceives the world through an unyielding binary lens, categorizing both deeds and people as entirely righteous or irredeemably wicked. Her innate competitiveness also led to profound personal tragedy when her manipulative brother Apollo dared her to strike a distant, indistinct mark, unwittingly causing her to execute Orion, the sole mortal man she ever truly loved. From a psychological perspective, this mythological figure serves as the ultimate archetype for an autonomous, relentlessly driven feminine spirit that refuses to be tethered by conventional expectations. You can observe this exact dynamic manifested in modern women who possess the extraordinary ability to lock onto their personal ambitions, remaining resolutely undisturbed by external distractions or societal pressures. Far from shying away from rivalry, individuals embodying this persona thrive on adversarial challenges, finding that fierce competition only amplifies the thrilling exhilaration of the pursuit. Much like the benevolent Zeus, numerous contemporary fathers foster their daughters' grand ambitions by equipping them with the necessary tools and steadfast encouragement to conquer their chosen fields. Conversely, deep psychological scars form when parents actively denounce their fiercely independent child, chastising her for failing to conform to traditional gender norms and unfairly branding her demeanor as overly masculine. In response to such rejection, these women instinctively project a formidable fortress of defiance, cleverly masking the profound emotional injuries festering just beneath the surface. Consequently, they internalize this parental criticism, spawning a paralyzing cycle of self-sabotage, where chronic imposter syndrome forces them to shrink away from fresh opportunities, chronically underachieve, and feel utterly hollow, even in the wake of monumental triumphs. Another profound developmental hurdle emerges when these strong-willed individuals harbor quiet contempt for mothers they perceive as fragile, submissive, or fundamentally ill-equipped to navigate the world. Terribly afraid of mirroring that perceived weakness, you will find they systematically eradicate any displays of emotional vulnerability, actively shunning traditional notions of soft femininity, maternal domesticity, and matrimonial yearning. While they naturally excel as fierce advocates and protective mentors for younger generations of women, they will almost always elevate their professional callings, artistic endeavors, or ideological crusades far above romantic entanglements. When they do pursue romance, they frequently gravitate toward colleagues or rivals, initiating a volatile partnership that inevitably collapses if their relentless competitive streak cannot be restrained, and any resulting conflicts with these men typically echo the unresolved turmoil of their earliest paternal interactions. The darker, shadowy aspect of this archetype manifests in a disturbing capacity to inflict profound emotional damage upon others without remorse. Because she equates emotional reliance with unforgivable frailty, she maintains romantic connections only under the strict condition that her partner remains physically elusive and emotionally detached. Operating with erratic unpredictability, she might be intensely engaged one moment, only to vanish completely the next, leaving those who genuinely cherish her feeling deeply marginalized, profoundly neglected, and bitterly resentful. Ironically, this precise manifestation of lunar detachment and glacial indifference often acts as a potent aphrodisiac for certain men, who find themselves inexplicably captivated by her clinical detachment and utterly impersonal brand of eroticism. Ancient myth encapsulates the catastrophic wrath of the goddess through the terrifying legend of the Caledonian boar, a nightmarish beast with fiery blood-red eyes that plunged entire herds into absolute pandemonium. Second only in ferocity to the formidable Hera, her divine fury is predominantly unleashed upon men, standing in stark contrast to the goddess Hera's notorious vendettas against rival females. Just as the legendary heroine Atalanta finally annihilated that monstrous swine by piercing its solitary weak point with a well-aimed spear, the modern woman, embodying this spirit, must bravely confront her own volatile hostility. She is compelled to acknowledge and neutralize this internal venom before it irrevocably devours her soul and permanently shatters her most cherished interpersonal bonds. Confronting that internal beast demands profound bravery, compelling an individual to accept the devastation inflicted upon themselves and those around them. Through a harsh lesson in modesty, a woman regains her mortal essence, recognizing that she is fundamentally flawed and human rather than an untouchable, retributive deity. In classical mythology, Athena, celebrated by the Romans as Minerva, reigns supreme over intellect and artisanal skills. Serving as a formidable combatant, she safeguards countless champions and stands as the namesake and guardian of Athens. Among the Olympian pantheon, she uniquely dons battle gear, perpetually grasping her iconic spear or shield. Her profound legacy is further represented through the olive branch, the owl, and the serpent, while her divine influence extends to masterful trades like pottery, intricate loom weaving, and the delicate shaping of gold. The manifestation of this deity among the supreme gods was nothing short of theatrical. Prophecies dictated that Medusa, the initial spouse of Zeus, would produce an heir whose intellect and bravery rivaled his own. To circumvent this fate, the supreme ruler devoured his pregnant wife, an act that soon resulted in an agonizing cranial affliction. From his brow sprang Athena, bursting into existence as a fully developed warrior clad in golden plates and screaming a ferocious battle cry. Consequently, this goddess champions logical reasoning, prioritizing the triumph of cognitive willpower over untamed natural impulses. Her essence thrives within structured urban environments, viewing the untrammeled wilderness as a chaotic force that requires diligent domestication and control. Women who resonate with the Athena archetype navigate existence guided predominantly by logic rather than emotional sentiment. In stark contrast to Artemis, who forged her path by isolating herself from the opposite sex, this psychological pattern actively integrates with patriarchal structures. Such individuals flourish in the company of influential, authoritative figures, seamlessly adopting the role of an indispensable advisor without ever succumbing to deep emotional vulnerability. Embodying the ultimate father's daughter, she staunchly advocates for male-centric hierarchies and systemic authority. Because her mythological counterpart emerged as a fully fledged adult, she symbolizes a vastly more seasoned and worldly iteration of the independent female spirit. Stripped of romantic illusions or naive idealism, her intensely practical mindset establishes her as the quintessential voice of grounded maturity. Renowned for tactical brilliance that secured countless Hellenic triumphs, this psychological profile frequently emerges in females navigating traditionally male-dominated arenas, such as cutting-edge science, complex engineering, and the armed forces. Within these environments, she experiences immense satisfaction, utilizing her formidable strategic intellect to advance personal initiatives or propel the ascent of a driven male associate. Shielded by an impenetrable cognitive armor, she remains profoundly unaffected by chaotic sentiments or irrational outbursts. This detachment allows her to calmly analyze unfolding events and meticulously plot her subsequent maneuvers. Devoting her existence entirely to professional pursuits, she effectively bypasses the profound sorrow and dependency that often accompany deep interpersonal attachments. By severing ties to the turbulent emotions of others, she remains blissfully devoid of destructive passions like intense jealousy or blinding fury. The woman channeling this energy is the absolute antithesis of the puella eterna, fundamentally rejecting the Cinderella narrative or any desire for a matrimonial rescue. The fairy tale concept of a redeeming prince completely contradicts her worldview, just as superficial youth and physical beauty hold little significance in her life. Advancing in age represents a gain rather than a detriment. She typically consolidates greater influence and capability during her middle years, cultivating heightened self-assurance, while her peers might fret over fading allure. Cultivating this specific archetypal energy requires rigorous mental exercises, such as absorbing concrete data, refining analytical thought processes, or navigating academic evaluations. Professional environments naturally foster similar traits, demanding an objective, highly skilled, and emotionally detached demeanor. Even profoundly compassionate individuals entering fields like healthcare must actively develop this detached observation and relentless logic to function effectively. A darker manifestation of this psychological framework is vividly illustrated by the Medusa effect, a chilling consequence of unchecked intellectual detachment. The mythological deity prominently displayed the aegis on her chest, a terrifying goat-hide adornment featuring the severed head of Medusa, notorious for petrifying anyone who dared to look. When a woman operating under this archetype assumes leadership, she can become remarkably unsympathetic, ruthlessly scrutinizing vulnerabilities and inadvertently paralyzing her subordinates with fear. Completely oblivious to the chilling impact of her demeanor, she believes she is merely executing her duties with a strict focus on tangible data over fragile sentiments. Ethical dilemmas and concepts of equity often take a back seat to the singular question of strategic efficacy, reflecting the truly shadowy dimensions of her personality. In clinical observations, psychiatrists like Bolan noted patients who recounted their personal histories with profound emotional emptiness, projecting a lifelessness that actively numbed the listener and turned their interpersonal connections to stone. Lurking beneath this formidable exterior lies the suppressed inner child, a crucial psychological component overshadowed by her instantaneous leap into adulthood. This mythological quirk perfectly mirrors the reality of many pragmatic women who were prematurely thrust out of their youthful innocence, losing the enchanting whimsy associated with the puella eterna. Reclaiming this lost phase demands a conscious effort to engage in pure, unstructured play to resurrect the girl who was never allowed to exist. Because this deity oversees craftsmanship, these individuals often discover profound satisfaction and psychological equilibrium in hobbies that yield physical creations, such as intricate sewing or loom weaving. Another deeply buried facet of her shadow involves the Great Mother, stemming from her complete ignorance regarding Metis, the maternal figure consumed by the supreme god. Consequently, those operating within this framework navigate the world as if they were born entirely devoid of maternal lineage. Shifting focus to the domestic sphere, Hestia, or Vesta in the Roman tradition, embodies the sacred hearth and remains the most enigmatic figure within the Olympian hierarchy. Rarely immortalized through anthropomorphic artistic depictions, her divine essence was instead perceived radiating from the vibrant flames positioned at the core of every household, civic center, and sacred sanctuary. Access to her innermost sanctums was strictly regulated, a profound honor reserved exclusively for her devoted priestesses, celebrated historically as the Vestal Virgins. Maintaining Rome's survival depended crucially on this promise of purity, with a grim fate of live burial awaiting those who broke it. You see, the ancients understood Hestia as the divine flame itself, offering essential illumination, comfort, and the means to prepare sustenance. Because of this vital role, humanity held her in the highest esteem, dedicating their finest tributes to her grace. Born first to the divine figures Rhea and Kronos, this goddess traces her lineage directly back to the primordial entities Gaia, known as Mother Earth, and Uranus, the Father Sky. Serving as the eldest sibling among the initial Olympians, she perfectly embodies the psychological framework of the wise old woman. Ultimately, a mere dwelling could never truly transform into a welcoming sanctuary unless infused with her foundational spirit. For women who carry this archetype, a residence transforms into a hallowed domain, where organizing physical surroundings acts as a profound ritual, not merely tedious housework. Tidying a space holds immense significance for such an individual. By structuring the external disarray, she cultivates internal peace, beautifully mirroring the connection between the universe and the individual. While immersing herself in these practical duties, she effectively silences the constant mental noise, replacing it with a profound, all-encompassing tranquility. When you step inside the residence of a Hestia woman, you will instantly perceive a seamless blend of her personal character and the core essence of the goddess of the hearth. An elusive, invisible atmosphere permeates the space, rendering it a deeply peaceful refuge. This enduring nature stems from her mythological origins. She was the initial child devoured by Kronos, and the final one he cast back out, enduring the most prolonged confinement within his shadowy depths, completely isolated from the rest. Such profound seclusion carries immense psychological weight for those influenced by her pattern. The classic adage about still waters perfectly describes this type of individual. She presents a calm, reserved exterior that conceals incredibly powerful, submerged feelings. Growing up, a girl bearing these traits frequently experiences a profound sense of detachment from both her family members and peers, fundamentally recognizing her inherent differences and radiating the distinct aura of an ancient spirit. Whenever adversity strikes, her instinctive reaction is to pull back emotionally, seeking comfort within the sanctuary of her own mind. During her youth, well-meaning adults often try to cure what they perceive as mere bashfulness, completely misunderstanding her natural inclination toward introspection. Furthermore, she completely bypasses everyday social theatrics, mirroring the goddess Hestia, who deliberately abstained from the romantic entanglements and martial conflicts that perpetually distracted the other Olympians. For this type of individual, time is rarely measured in strictly numerical increments, known as chronos, but rather experienced through the qualitative richness of kairos. Instead of merely trying to kill time, she engages fully in the present moment, achieving a seamless state of flow where everything feels properly synchronized. Because her fundamental sense of self remains firmly rooted within, chaotic external events simply cannot shatter her composure, nor does she require a romantic partner to achieve a sense of emotional completeness. Her conscious mind operates in profound harmony with the self, perfectly illustrating what the ancient Greeks called apatheia, an unshakable tranquility that remains undisturbed by passionate turmoil. This intrinsic serenity allows Hestia to offer crucial insight and stability to the other psychological archetypes, guiding them toward a balanced middle path that avoids dangerous extremes. Ultimately, her circular hearth, burning brightly at its core, serves as a magnificent mandala, reflecting the ultimate archetype of psychic wholeness. While many individuals face severe emotional turbulence when children leave home or a spouse passes away, these milestones do not devastate those aligned with this inner flame. Although they certainly embrace marriage and motherhood, their core identity does not desperately depend on fulfilling these specific societal roles. Their true developmental hurdle lies instead in navigating the chaotic external world, a struggle that embodies the shadow aspect of Hestia. Devoid of traditional ambition, this type of person entirely disregards the pursuit of influence, finding standard methods of social advancement completely alien. Consequently, highly competitive individuals who evaluate success through material achievements frequently underestimate or completely ignore her quiet presence. Furthermore, her inherent kindness can occasionally appear somewhat detached, meaning she must consciously practice projecting her profound internal affections outward for others to witness. Inherently averse to adopting a persona, the artificial mask of social adaptation we use to blend in, she simply has no desire to manufacture a favorable public image. This radical authenticity leaves her appearing almost entirely exposed. She shares her truth without hesitation, revealing vulnerabilities that most people would instinctively hide in similar circumstances. Consequently, amidst crowded social events, she regularly grapples with feelings of intense awkwardness and inadequacy, feeling psychologically bare and entirely out of place. Shifting our focus to the more susceptible divine figures, Hera, Demeter, and Persephone, you will discover that they beautifully encapsulate the archetypal roles of wife, mother, and daughter. Their entire sense of self revolves intricately around their interpersonal connections, deeply echoing humanity's profound desire for attachment and social integration. The specific type of awareness tied to these relationship-focused deities operates as a diffuse consciousness, functioning much like the gentle radiance of a lantern that softly brightens its entire surroundings. This open, wide-ranging perception effortlessly captures the comprehensive gestalt of any given scenario, standing in stark contrast to a highly focused mindset that sharply targets one isolated detail. When a woman naturally inclined toward relationships attempts to concentrate intensely on her studies, severe friction inevitably arises if her household companions constantly disrupt her workflow. Her naturally expansive awareness leaves her highly vulnerable to distraction, while the man in her life might unconsciously perceive her sudden, intense focus on tasks as a threatening rival demanding her affection. To him, it feels as though a comforting, unseen warmth has abruptly vanished, instilling a vague sense of dread and emotional insecurity within his mind. His resulting, seemingly pointless interruptions inevitably provoke her frustration, which only deepens his unfounded feelings of abandonment. However, the moment he realizes that her shift from broad awareness to sharp concentration is not a personal slight, that underlying relational strain completely evaporates. Looking specifically at Hera, whom Roman mythology recognizes as Juno, we see the ultimate patroness of matrimony, reigning as the queen of the Olympians, and serving as both sibling and spouse to Zeus. One of her primary emblems remains the cow, a creature historically tied to the great mother archetype, due to its role in providing vital sustenance. Even the Milky Way itself, our vast galaxy, whose name stems directly from the Greek term gala, referring to milk, traces its conceptual origins back to the ancient myth where the great goddess's nurturing fluids birthed the cosmos. The creation of the Milky Way traces back to Hera's mythology, originating from the moment milk cascaded from the goddess's breast. Fundamentally, the Hera archetype embodies a profound feminine desire for matrimony, where the lack of a male partner brings about profound sorrow. You can see this illustrated in Boland's account of a divorced 32-year-old nurse who described experiencing a massive void within her mind, equating it to a psychological injury that perpetually refuses to mend. Individuals navigating a sequence of fleeting romances, retreating at the first sign of difficulty or when the initial spark wanes, might find immense value in embracing the Hera archetype, much like those experiencing a profound disconnect from their spouses. If your innate drive to forge a lasting bond remains underdeveloped, you must intentionally cultivate it by acknowledging the profound value of dedication and summoning the resolve to uphold it. For a woman embodying this psychological pattern, the social standing, reverence, and dignity associated with matrimony are absolutely essential, driving her deep-seated craving to be acknowledged as a respectable man's wife. Lacking a husband leaves her entirely adrift, virtually guaranteeing she will avoid legally ending the union, regardless of how terribly she is treated. True satisfaction for her stems directly from positioning her spouse at the absolute core of her existence, making professional pursuits or academic achievements feel completely supplementary. Consequently, an initial severe romantic split inflicts a massive emotional trauma, and growing older without a ring often amplifies her internal void, a feeling heavily exacerbated by societal pressures. She views the ceremony of her nuptials as the paramount milestone of her existence, officially transforming her into a spouse and satisfying a lifelong compulsion, cementing an identity that persists in her mind long after any potential separation. Moving past the mere psychological craving for a partner and the societal validation of matrimony, the Hera archetype embodies a profound, esoteric quest for completeness achieved via a hieros gamos, or sacred marriage. While a wedding initiates a bodily joining, it simultaneously facilitates an ethereal bond where two individuals merge into a single entity, unlocking a level of unity impossible to attain in solitude. You will find this concept mirrored in alchemical traditions as the integration of the king and queen, the ultimate masculine and feminine archetypes, referred to as the conjunctio, which serves as the culminating phase required to manifest the philosopher's stone. The dark side of the Hera archetype manifests through a subliminal merging with her partner, effectively erasing her independent identity and granting him total authority over her life's trajectory. Her entire capacity for joy relies entirely on her husband's unwavering loyalty, the priority he assigns to their union, and his vocal gratitude for her role. Experiencing a deficit in these areas utterly crushes her spirit, though you can circumvent such immense suffering by deliberately preventing yourself from rushing foolishly into a premature marital commitment. Frequently, she superimposes an impossibly perfect fantasy onto a flawed human man, ultimately experiencing crushing betrayal when his reality inevitably falls short of her towering standards. The slightest perceived provocation triggers immediate suspicions of unfaithfulness, while a husband's public aloofness causes her profound embarrassment. During his absences, her mind becomes a playground for paranoid delusions, leaving her vulnerable to intense, imaginative torment fueled by envy. Rather than sinking into sorrow, she covers her profound insecurities with explosive anger, an emotional strategy that artificially inflates her sense of dominance and control. Echoing the tales of Greek mythology, where the divine matriarch rarely confronted Zeus regarding his endless affairs, but instead targeted his mistresses, this personality type instinctively weaponizes the agony of betrayal into a spiteful fury aimed squarely at rival females. This negative psychological manifestation compels the individual to shift guilt away from the partner she desperately clings to, projecting it onto completely external targets. Should her own offspring expose their father's cruelty, her absolute allegiance ensures she will furiously defend him, aggressively forbidding anyone from speaking poorly of the patriarch. Her retribution often extends to deliberately destroying a perceived rival's social standing through fabrication, or occasionally escalating to literal violence. If you ever find yourself consumed by this toxic aspect of the archetype, a potential remedy emerges from the lore of Hera's son, Hephaestus, also recognized as Vulcan by the Romans, who served as the god of the forge. According to certain legends, his mother discarded him immediately after birth because of his physical lameness. This neglected deity embodies a dormant psychological resilience that the goddess herself discarded, yet it remains completely accessible for those willing to harness it. This stands in stark contrast to her preferred child, Ares, the god of war, whose chaotic battlefield fury perfectly reflected her own vengeful nature. Operating a smithy deep within a fiery volcano, the divine blacksmith metaphorically demonstrates how explosive, molten rage can be successfully restrained and transformed into constructive, artistic energy, forging legendary armaments utilized by the renowned heroes of ancient Greece. Engaging in dedicated labor, whether intellectual or physical, provides a highly effective mechanism for redirecting hostile impulses, presenting you with a vastly superior alternative to allowing uncontrolled bitterness to quietly destroy your soul. Governing the abundance of agricultural yields was Demeter, the divine embodiment of the harvest, whom the Romans venerated as Ceres, the etymological root of our modern term for morning cereal. Serving as the fourth spouse to her own sibling Zeus, her legacy is inextricably intertwined with her sole offspring, Persephone. The ancient text, known as the Homeric Hymn to Demeter, paints a vivid picture of this young maiden, innocently picking blossoms right before being forcefully seized by Hades, the fearsome sovereign of the underworld. Catching the desperate screams of her child, the frantic mother embarks on a relentless quest, scouring the earth for 9 consecutive days and 9 nights while entirely abandoning her agricultural responsibilities. This divine neglect triggers a catastrophic global starvation event that pushes mortal existence to the brink of annihilation, prompting an alarmed Zeus to dispatch Hermes down to the infernal realm to broker the maiden's liberation. The ruler of the dead seemingly complies with the request, yet stealthily tricks the girl into consuming several pomegranate seeds prior to her departure. The eventual reunion brings unparalleled joy to the grieving mother, instantly revitalizing the barren soil and ushering in a renewed era of botanical prosperity. Tragically, ingesting sustenance from the realm of the dead forged an unbreakable esoteric tether, forcing the young goddess to dedicate a portion of her existence to reigning alongside Hades. Consequently, Persephone resides in the subterranean domain for 1/3 of the annual cycle, plunging the mortal world into the freezing despair of winter as Demeter mourns her absence, before finally ascending in the spring to blanket the world in vibrant life for the remainder of the year. Beyond merely accounting for the shifting seasons, this ancient legend functions as a profound metaphor, illustrating the endless loop of mortality and renewal. For more than 2,000 years, these events provided the foundation for the Eleusinian mysteries, which stood as the most revered spiritual ceremonies in ancient Greece. Participants in these sacred rites underwent a metaphorical passing and resurrection, effectively eradicating their dread of mortality. After all, if you consciously undergo a figurative demise prior to your actual end, the ultimate physical transition loses its terrifying finality. The quintessential mother archetype finds its embodiment in Demeter, characterized primarily by her profound bond with her offspring. While maternal figures abound in the pantheon, she stands alone as the supreme caregiver, perfectly symbolizing the deep-seated urge to provide physical, emotional, and spiritual sustenance. Should a woman possessing this strong Demeter disposition find her caretaking impulses thwarted, she frequently spirals into profound melancholy. Furthermore, individuals embodying this profile often harbor frustration toward modern societal shifts that seemingly diminish the traditional maternal role, as their deep-seated desire to devote themselves entirely to child-rearing clashes with contemporary expectations to pursue external careers. Just as the deity's sorrow once blighted the earth and brought humanity to the brink of starvation, the darker side of a Demeter-type individual manifests through the deprivation of affection, intimacy, or essential care. This personality typically perceives a child's emerging independence as a profound personal deprivation, frequently resulting in offspring who remain uncomfortably dependent long after they have reached maturity. Driven by the unwavering conviction that she invariably possesses superior judgment, this maternal figure exercises excessive dominance, a dynamic that paradoxically crushes her children's self-assurance while simultaneously multiplying her own burdens. When crushed beneath the weight of her self-imposed obligations, she harbors intense resentment, yet rarely voices these frustrations outright. She instead buries her discontent and intensifies her efforts to manage every task single-handedly. Inevitably, this bottled-up tension leaks out through veiled hostility, transforming straightforward refusals into confusing, antagonistic gestures that leave you guessing at her true intent. As the years advance and her deeply cherished dependents inevitably depart or create emotional boundaries, she is highly susceptible to an acute crisis of purpose, mourning the sudden void in her daily existence. Consequently, witnessing her daughter forge a romantic connection often triggers a visceral reaction, reigniting the traumatic myth as she feels her precious child is being stolen away by a modern-day Hades. In the realm of romance, this fiercely nurturing personality might sustain a relationship driven purely by compassion for her partner's perceived inadequacies. She frequently finds herself tethered to a poor Athena, a perpetually adolescent, self-involved figure who dodges adult obligations while clinging to a delusion of innate superiority. Blinded by her innate compulsion to care for the vulnerable, she willingly excuses his flaws, convincing herself that society is simply treating him unfairly. Even when his chronic inconsideration causes her genuine pain and fury, his manipulative reassurances that she is his sole source of true love instantly erase any lingering resentment. Shifting focus to the daughter, the deity Persephone, recognized by the Romans as Proserpina, enjoyed a dual veneration. First as the youthful core, intimately tied to blooming agriculture in springtime, and ultimately as the formidable sovereign presiding over the realm of the departed. Despite lacking a seat among the 12 Olympians, she reigned supreme at the heart of the Eleusinian mysteries, serving as the divine conduit through which ancient worshippers grasped the promise of resurrection via her cyclical emergence from the dark abyss. While her initial descent into the subterranean domain was entirely involuntary, her eventual ascension to sovereignty perfectly illustrates a profound journey of personal evolution and empowerment. On a psychological level, this subterranean kingdom mirrors the most profound, hidden strata of the human mind. Individuals grappling with severe mental breaks, who drift away from tangible reality into the murky waters of the collective unconscious, enact a modern tragedy, strikingly similar to that ancient abduction. However, Those who successfully navigate these harrowing psychological depths emerge endowed with profound wisdom, uniquely equipped to shepherd you and others through the treacherous landscapes of the inner self, proving that genuine healing often springs from a deeply scarred practitioner. Following her triumphant return from the abyss, the reborn queen was perpetually accompanied by Hecate, the formidable deity of shadows, intersections, and arcane arts, whose constant presence served as a living testament to successfully conquering the terrifying unknown. Conversely, the darker psychological counterpart of this youthful archetype manifests through excessive submissiveness, striking gullibility, and an insatiable craving for external validation. This individual embodies the puella eterna, actively dodging any concrete commitments to careers, studies, or romantic partners, paralyzed by the fear that selecting one path permanently obliterates all alternative futures. Crippled by this chronic indecision, she perpetually anticipates a magical external force, or a stereotypical savior, to overhaul her existence, clinging to a fairy tale narrative of everlasting bliss. Tragically, when a real partner actually materializes, the stark contrast between flawed reality and her flawless daydreams inevitably plunges her into swift and bitter disillusionment. Exploring this dynamic further in her seminal work, The Way of All Women, the prominent Jungian psychologist Esther Harding identifies this specific character as the anima woman, a chameleon-like figure who readily absorbs and mirrors a partner's idealized subconscious projections. She meticulously tailors her entire persona to satisfy her companion's desires, molding her appearance and behavior specifically to enchant and pacify him without a second thought. Operating largely devoid of deep self-awareness or introspective scrutiny, she simply exists in a reactive state, often lacking the voice to articulate her own genuine needs. Essentially, her default mode of operation revolves around mindlessly twisting her own identity to perfectly match whatever unrealistic mold a romantic partner attempts to force her into. Besides such an agreeable companion, a partner revels in the illusion of absolute dominance, confident that his decisions will remain unquestioned and his authority unchallenged. This setup equally permits him to safely display profound incompetence or childish ignorance without facing any dreaded critique from his mate. Meanwhile, navigating motherhood, this eternally youthful woman might permanently view herself as an imposter, mimicking a maternal role, forever viewing her own parent as the sole authentic caregiver. Conversely, her own neglected offspring often mature with the heavy realization that they were forced to parent their own mother. Ultimately, a severe descent into narcissism remains a terrifying hazard for these individuals, as they can become so overwhelmingly obsessed with their own reflection and inner anxieties that all genuine empathy evaporates, leaving them trapped in an endless cycle of shallow self-absorption. You might observe that for certain individuals, other people merely serve as mirrors, offering reflections that validate their very existence. As the eternal maiden eventually confronts the middle stages of life, tangible obstacles begin to emerge, forcing her to realize that the fantasies she previously nurtured are no longer attainable. Rather than embracing maturity, she shuns the inescapable duties of being an adult and harbors a deep terror of growing older. Because the passage of time cannot be stopped, she finds herself pulled unwillingly through her existence, resembling a captive bound by heavy iron chains. Whenever everyday life presents overwhelming challenges, she seeks refuge within the comforting confines of her own imagination. Yet, as you delve deeper into this psychological pattern, you'll notice that this former haven inevitably transforms into a confining cell. The individual risks becoming permanently trapped inside her mental landscape, completely incapable of reconnecting with the tangible world. By slowly detaching from their surroundings, certain individuals embodying the Persephone archetype appear to drift toward true psychological fragmentation. They inhabit a mental space saturated with metaphorical visions, suffering from fundamentally warped self-images, while others merely use this imaginary domain as a shield against a truth that feels entirely too harsh to bear. To break this cycle, the Persephone figure must forge a steadfast dedication to a chosen path and relentlessly adhere to it. Should she succeed in making this commitment, you will witness her slow but profound evolution from a perpetual child into a fully realized adult. If her journey allows her to transition from an innocent girl into a sovereign ruler of her own life, she often acquires the profound gravity of an enlightened sage, who comprehends the profound secrets, giving significance to both existence and mortality. Ultimately, she gathers profound internal insights that completely eradicate her previous anxieties regarding the aging process and the inevitability of death. Shifting our focus, you will find that Aphrodite, universally recognized as the divine embodiment of romance and physical allure, occupies a completely distinct classification as the deity of profound metamorphosis. Within the traditions of Greek mythology, this powerful figure possessed the ability to compel both human beings and divine entities, excluding only those goddesses sworn to chastity, to succumb to passion and generate new life. She placed a far higher premium on cultivating intense emotional connections with those around her than she did on the fierce autonomy prized by the independent deities, or the enduring, unbreakable attachments sought by the more susceptible, relationship-oriented figures. The psychological state intrinsically linked to this goddess possesses an entirely unparalleled quality. In stark contrast to the scattered perception typical of the dependent deities, the focus demonstrated by Aphrodite remains incredibly sharp, yet highly welcoming, demonstrating a deeper connection to its target than the relentless, tunnel vision approach of the independent goddesses. You can picture this specific mindset as a theatrical spotlight illuminating a performance, seamlessly guiding our gaze toward whatever occupies the center stage, while encouraging a state of engagement that is simultaneously tranquil and deeply captivating. While conducting her clinical sessions, the psychoanalyst Bolin noted that she could become entirely immersed in her client's narrative, even as her intellect maintained vigorous activity by forming continuous cognitive links to the spoken words. She recognized that slipping into excessive openness compromised her professional detachment, whereas adopting too much clinical distance threatened to extinguish her compassionate understanding. Consequently, you can see that effective psychoanalysis demands a delicate equilibrium between empathetic listening and necessary emotional distance, engaging both the aware and hidden layers of the practitioner and the patient in a deeply transformative, shared experience. Identified by Roman civilization as Venus, this figure stands as the most visually magnificent of all the divine women, frequently adorned by the ancient Greeks with the descriptive title of golden. As you explore her ancient roots, you will discover conflicting accounts of her genesis. The poet Homer portrays her as the offspring born to Zeus and the aquatic spirit Dione. Conversely, the storyteller Hesiod presents a significantly more dramatic inception, describing how Kronos severed the reproductive organs of his predecessor Uranus and hurled them into the ocean, allowing the goddess to rise from the waters in total physical maturity. She ultimately selected Hephaestus, the crippled master of metallurgy, to be her spouse, turning the outcast child of Hera into her lover, although she consistently engaged in numerous romantic affairs with an array of divine and mortal figures. Ultimately, their matrimonial bond serves as a powerful metaphor for the convergence of aesthetic splendor and technical skill, a synthesis that gives birth to all artistic creation. On a psychological level, Aphrodite serves as the ultimate blueprint for the lover archetype. Whenever a pair of individuals succumbs to romance, they perceive one another illuminated by an idealized glow, becoming magnetically attracted to the aesthetic perfection they project onto their partner. An undeniable sorcery permeates their environment, summoning a profound condition of bewitchment and intense passion that makes you and your partner feel vastly more magnificent and divine than your everyday personas. Beyond merely driving the biological urge to propagate humanity, she embodies the foundational drive for innovation, sparking the genesis of visionary concepts and unprecedented artistic works. Acting as the ultimate spiritual guide or muse, she delivers the essential fire that prevents creative pursuits from descending into lifeless, purely logical exercises. The darker aspect of this specific psychological profile manifests in the unavoidable deterioration brought about by time, presenting a crushing truth for the Aphrodite woman, if she has historically relied on her physical appeal as a primary wellspring of validation. Nevertheless, you will notice that navigating the later stages of life proves significantly easier for those specific individuals who actively immerse themselves in artistic or inventive professions. Because they have accumulated a vast reservoir of lived experiences to fuel their imaginative fires, they possess exceptionally refined technical abilities that allow them to articulate their internal visions with unparalleled mastery. Women influenced by this powerful archetype generally exist purely within the current moment, processing their existence entirely through the lens of immediate sensory stimulation. She typically behaves with a complete disregard for the potential long-term repercussions of her choices, allowing matters of the heart to perpetually override any logical or pragmatic concerns. She becomes romantically entangled with astonishing ease, genuinely believing on every single occasion that she has finally discovered her flawless, ultimate partner. Caught up in the intoxicating spell of her affection, her current companion might feel elevated to a divine status, only to inevitably find himself abandoned and substituted by a newer interest. Consequently, as you track her romantic history, you will uncover a lengthy trail of emotionally injured, despondent, and furious men who harbor deep resentments over being exploited and subsequently thrown away. In order to shatter this destructive cycle, she must cultivate the ability to deeply cherish a flawed, mortal individual, instead of demanding a flawless deity, effectively liberating herself from inflated fantasies and transient infatuations. When observing the darker manifestations of the Aphrodite archetype, you can clearly identify two distinct and troubling behavioral loops. In the initial scenario, the individual fiercely attaches herself to a partner who abuses or demeans her, willingly forfeiting everything just to receive sporadic fragments of his attention, feeling utterly paralyzed by the intoxicating dependency of the bond despite her profound misery. Alternatively, the second dysfunctional pattern involves the relentless pursuit of a man who unequivocally spurns her advances, leading her to engage in deeply erratic or intrusive actions. Driven by this obsession, she could incessantly bombard him with communication, physically track his movements to a different city, or ultimately face criminal charges for forcefully entering his private residence. Escaping the detrimental snare of Aphrodite requires a conscious realization of the bond's destructive nature, followed by a deliberate choice to sever those ties. To truly understand this dynamic, you must look at the broader spectrum of feminine archetypes that collectively form the entirety of your psychological makeup. Artemis, for instance, perfectly captures the autonomous, goal-driven essence of the feminine soul, while Athena represents the confident individual governed entirely by logic rather than emotion. Hestia reflects an unwavering stability paired with a profound appreciation for quiet solitude, whereas Hera channels her energy exclusively toward matrimony and securing a lifelong partner. Demeter manifests the primal urge to nourish offspring both physically and spiritually. Persephone highlights a natural inclination toward submissiveness and yielding. And finally, Aphrodite compels you to embrace your profound creative and procreative potentials. You can visualize your internal mental landscape as an ongoing committee meeting, populated by vastly different characters, ranging from masculine to feminine, youthful to elderly, and boisterous to completely silent. In an optimal scenario, a robust ego presides over this assembly, astutely directing the conversation and preserving harmony through vigilant management. Yet, if intense internal strife erupts and your ego loses its grip on the situation, an internal Olympian battle can unfold. During such profound conflicts, a single goddess archetype might forcefully intervene, effectively usurping control of your personality and symbolically ruling over your mortal consciousness. Should your ego completely fail to reinstate equilibrium, this hostile takeover can precipitate profound mental collapse or even psychosis. Far more frequently, however, this psychological hijacking manifests as persistent melancholy or unpredictable mood swings, which are simply the frustrated echoes of your unexpressed or suppressed archetypal forces. You can dissolve this internal tension by cultivating an ego that remains fully attuned to the distinct motivations and desires of every inner voice. Conversely, harboring a bias that validates certain archetypes while banishing others to the shadows guarantees future psychological disarray. Because you ignore these potent internal forces, they will ultimately withdraw their support from you. Ultimately, your identity is not simply sculpted by the external events you endure, but rather by the profound internal transformations those experiences trigger. The way you process emotions and navigate reactions, both within your own mind and out in the world, dictates your ultimate evolution far more than the raw severity of the hardships you face. You must recognize that the authentic price of any achievement is always measured by whatever you surrender to attain it. Genuine courage does not mean existing without fear, but rather boldly forging ahead despite your terror. This exact quality transforms you into the heroine of your own narrative. By refusing to accept the role of a victim and embracing life's steepest hurdles as necessary initiations, you actively claim the decisive responsibility of choice that defines true heroism.